I know many of you who have registered for the event, but for those I don't know, my name is Elizabeth Heald and I'm the President and CEO of the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation, and I am so pleased to be moderating this discussion today. To begin, we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we are, I was going to say gathered today, but where we are broadcasting today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. And we acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and contributions to our community. And we offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of Canada. I've been attending the Indigenous course at Renison College this semester, and I'm continuing to focus my education, as are many of the members of our team, towards learning more about Indigenous truth. Today's topic is the intersectionality between affordable housing and race, and is the third conversation in our anti-racism series. We had two other conversations last year that many of you would have attended: anti-racism and the need for systems change. And the other one was the need to decolonize not-for-profits. Over the next hour, you will hear our panelists share their perspectives on localized issues and the importance of action in Waterloo Region. Our panel consists of some amazing leaders in our community. First, Clarence Kakagi, founder of Crow Shield Lodge. Carl Cadogan, CEO of Reception House, Waterloo Region. MPP Laura May Lindo, Kitchener Centre. And Tennille Warren, Restorative Schools Service Coordinator at Community Justice Initiatives. In the essence of time, we have been sharing their bios in the chat function, so please take a look to learn more about these incredible leaders. I would now like to invite our speakers to join us on screen. Welcome everyone, and thank you again for being with us today. There is a lot of content to cover, and so why don't we jump right into some of the questions. Our hope, as I mentioned, is to leave some time at the end to address some of our audience questions and to have you respond. Again, to our audience, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and if we don't get to all of your questions, we commit to responding either through the follow-up email or in a future session. So we know that access to affordable housing affects people differently. So what are some of the barriers that each of you are seeing for racialized people in Waterloo Region? And I'm just going to start with the person that's top of my screen, which is Carl. Carl, would you like to address that question?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and welcome to those folks who are in the audience. It's hard being first, and I know it's hard being last, but where do I start? Housing, Reception House works with refugees, newcomers to the community. A significant number of those folks are racialized people. And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen a much more intense effort on our behalf, staff of Reception House, in trying to maneuver through the issues faced by the folks that we're trying to house. Meaning that it's not just the affordability, which is a huge piece of it, but it's really trying to educate employers, landlords about the issues that are faced by the people that are coming and they're asking for housing. They're competing with all the other people in the community who are looking for housing. And I think in 99.9% of the cases, these are individuals who have no family in the community, so they have no references. They haven't rented lease places before, so they have very little. And employers, I keep saying employers because I'm doing a lot of work around jobs, but landlords are needs to be educated. So we spend a great deal of our time trying to educate employers, landlords about the needs of these folks. It means that we spend a lot more time with each family as we speak to landlords. It means that we spend more time with landlords. I think generally there's a reluctance on many landlords to listen, but there's also, for many, they want to learn. So it's really trying to determine how much time you spend with those people who are sort of gatekeepers and how much time you spend with those people who are willing to look to see how they could support racialized and newcomers and people who are trying to sort of break into the housing market. I stop there now, but I think that it's broad, it's significant, and it's one of the biggest challenges that we have as part of our service delivery is really connecting people to affordable housing.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Carl. An important point for sure about landlord education. Laura May, another perspective on this question?
Yeah, as the member of provincial parliament, like sitting on the provincial level, what I'm seeing are the systemic issues that had never been dealt with, that haven't set us up to be able to navigate this pandemic, much less get access to affordable housing. So when I think about the fact that we've got an educational system that pushes so many Black, Brown, and Indigenous people out, which means that they're not set up for high-paying jobs. And then you add the market right now, where we're seeing folks, if you're renting your place, your landlord may now decide to sell because of how much money they can get for that place. And now there are no options. Our rental prices have skyrocketed. Our housing prices have skyrocketed to buy. And so I'm seeing a lot of people that are left literally with no options. And so the advocacy that we end up doing on the provincial level is to try and get more investment in affordable houses, thinking creatively about all of that. But what we're up against for racialized communities in particular during this pandemic is that there are no direct investments for our communities to be able to deal with things like the amount of racialized folks that are in multi-generational homes that don't have enough space to isolate. And when they're trying to figure out the next step to better themselves and their families, it's difficult to be in a position where I can't even provide them with an option, because all of those traditional options have disappeared rather quickly. Nothing like a pandemic to bring to light some of those structural issues that nobody has actually addressed for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the advocacy that you do, MPP Lindo. Tennille, would you like to weigh in on this question as well?
Absolutely. I think it's funny that Carl is like, I keep thinking about employment, but I think employment is a clear barrier. Laura May also just said it, stable, livable income to be able to afford housing. I think we're seeing a process of gradual gentrification taking place, and that's pushing people out. So there's that displacement. And there's simply not enough housing that people can afford. And we're not talking about speculative housing investment as also pushing people out. I think about my neighborhood, I can name 4 houses walking distance from me that are all just Airbnb. And houses that we know are just sitting there, they're owned, waiting for it to cost for the price to go up. That's coming into the region. We're seeing that, and that's impacting housing prices. We're seeing NIMBYism. Every time a development is up, we see the meetings popping up. So there are people fighting affordable housing development because they don't want the community to change, which brings us back to systemic issues, the racism, the housing discrimination, the xenophobia, the anti-immigrant sentiment. We're also seeing with the pandemic, because more people are at home, different bodies are brushing up against each other. We're seeing increased neighborly disputes So more requests for mediation services is coming up as well. So we are literally seeing our systemic issues play out in affordable housing properties because the different people that are impacted by it, you're talking about aging in place. So we need more units, but we also don't have a system that moves people from affordable housing to a new property, for example. So that impacts the social housing list that we have, what, a 7-year waiting list? So I think that there are a number of barriers that everyone's facing, and we're not addressing them effectively. We're not collecting the data that we can use to make informed decisions. I'm looking at all of the housing strategies that are filled with innovation, but are lacking in targeted initiatives, targeted data collection. When I read a strategy that references human rights, but does not actually name that discrimination is embedded into the current housing practices, that's a red flag for me. That tells me that we're going to get a bunch of new buildings with the same problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Tennealle. A plethora of additional challenges there for sure. And Clarence, so Carl and Laura May and Tennealle have given us quite an excellent list of issues and barriers. What about from your perspective?
Well, that's going to be hard to follow up. They've covered a lot of stuff. Yeah, I'll do the best I can. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me here. And I want to acknowledge Carl, Tennealle, Laura May, and Elizabeth, and everybody behind the scenes to make this possible. I did consult with some Indigenous people in our community. I also talked to some other leaders. So I'm going to weave in a bunch of things together along with my own voice. Some of the barriers that I see or that are in our community is the affordability of housing. You know, we keep saying that housing is a right and everybody deserves a right to be housed, but sometimes that's not attainable. There's too far of a gap. There's too far of a gap. You know, when I look at our region, I see all this social development. I see all these cranes on the horizons. I see all this stuff happening. But then I see a disconnect. I see a total disconnect from here to here. And what is really going on? What is really going on in between there is that when I look at it, something is fueling that. And what is that? Capitalism? You know, we evict animals out of their homes. We pave over their homes. We put in sewer systems. We bring in services. And then the price of that land goes up. Then we start building. The price of the land goes up even more. And then we have inflation and all of these other contributing factors, but we still have this pocket of people that are struggling. And do those people that are struggling, do they have a voice? Is their voice being heard? And are those individuals being brought to the table? It seems like so many times throughout development and throughout growth, everybody is actually stating what they think is within the best interests of those individuals that are struggling. But those individuals really don't have a voice and they're not sitting at the table. So when I think of some barriers, racism is one, housing stock is another, right? Lack of funding. And then is the funding really funneled to the appropriate places when it does come? And that's about all I can say right now on that topic. I have a lot of other stuff written down. And then the one thing that, you know, housing now, houses are a commodity, right? And housing is a human right. That's what I think. And I think a lot of other people do, not only as Indigenous, but as BIPOC. And housing should not be a commodity. And the thing that just comes to light now is, you know, just last week, there was a home that was sold in our region that went for $300,000 over asking price. I'm sure there was a lot of contributing underlying factors as to why. But then that makes you think, how is housing ever going to be affordable, right? So I think we need to work with landlords. These individuals need support with navigation. They need to know their rights. And we have a lot of things to address to make all of this come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Clarence, you bring up a lot of interesting points for me. I think about Leilani Farha, who was a UN Special Rapporteur and talked about at one of our previous sessions about housing being a human right. And she said something about people are experts in their own lives. And it reminded me what you were saying about, you know, we need to make sure we're listening to people who are going to be living in the neighborhoods. What are the needs? What do they need? Not just assuming we understand that. And so, so thank you for bringing that up as well. You know, a lot of you talked as well about data. And so we dug in prior to this. We've been trying to find information around what is the intersectionality between affordable housing or lack thereof and race. You know, just for a definition for some of our audience members who may not know, housing is said to be in core housing need if its housing falls below at least one of the adequacy, affordability, or suitability standards. And it would have to spend 30% or more of its total before tax income to pay the median rent of alternative local housing that's acceptable. So housing that would fit the adequacy, the affordability, and the suitability standards. And some of you talked about, you know, multi-generational families in homes that can't distance themselves. So we acknowledge that there seems to be a lack of disaggregated local data as it refers to affordability and race. So here are some of the stats that we found. Through Stats Canada, for Ontario, 21% of the total visible minority population in Ontario are in core housing need, which is more than double the amount for people who are not a visible minority. In Waterloo Region, immigrants are 25% more likely to be in housing need than non-immigrants. Also in Waterloo Region, Indigenous people are 30% more likely to be in core housing need than non-Indigenous people. There are approximately 30,000 households that are precariously housed in Waterloo Region. Tennille mentioned a 7-year wait list, and there's, you know, various numbers of how many people are actually waiting for housing support. So I'll open this up to any of you to jump in to comment on this data, or perhaps on the lack of disaggregated data and how you feel we can move forward with that.
I'll jump in, and I wanted to frame that the housing crisis that we're seeing, especially with the multi-generational homes, this is under the definition of homelessness. Being underhoused and in overcrowded housing is a type of homelessness. A colloquial terminology, some people would consider it a type of couch surfing. So we also have to consider homeless statistics in this process. And we know that 1 in 5 racialized families in Canada are living in poverty, as compared to 1 in 20 of the alternative. And we also know that those same families are spending 50%, not 30%, but 50% or more of their income on housing. When we go back to employment and the housing crisis, we know that racialized people, Black people, are making 76% of each dollar in their income. And Black women in particular are making 58 cents to the dollar of their income. So we cannot separate income and poverty and homelessness, because that's literally what we have here. Being precariously housed means you're on the edge of homelessness. you're on the edge of street homelessness or shelter homelessness. But when you're living in unstable housing, overcrowded housing, where bodies are moving in and out, you're in a state of cyclical homelessness. So we have to realize that our housing crisis is also a homeless crisis, and it's playing out significantly on Black, Indigenous. We know that the Indigenous population, I think it makes up 30% of the homeless population, but 0.5% of the population of Canada. That's significant, and that balloons when you start to look at the housing crisis. So when we're talking about this, we have to recognize that are the systems that are being put in place actually, when we disaggregate that data, what happens next? Yep. We know we have to disaggregate it, but what happens after we disaggregate that data? How are we going to respond to those crises? Because right now we're talking about housing. We're seeing inclusionary zoning, we're seeing increased housing stock, but we're not seeing significant conversations around creating housing for the Indigenous community with their cultural representation. We're not seeing culturally literate and relevant and responsive policies being developed. I've looked at all the housing models within the region. I've looked at what's been happening since June and George Floyd and all of the changes that are taking place. And I'm not seeing the same kind of action and passion and fervor around dismantling the systemic oppression that exists in housing discrimination. And a part of that is challenging this visible minority data, which other sectors are doing. Mm-hmm. So we also need to see a call from the people with the decision makers in housing to say, if we want to help these people, you need to empower us with the policies to collect the data that we need to collect. There are other things that I will mention later, but that's what I have to say for now.
If I could jump off of what Tennille was saying, I had written in my notes as I was listening to the stats, the ways in which the crisis gets used against us serves just to perpetuate this same cycle that Tennille's discussing. So for instance, suitability, having a lack of suitability of your housing has been a rationale to go into Indigenous and Black homes and take their children. Right. And so that's why we see an overrepresentation of our kids in foster care, of, that the issues, the systemic issues that Tennille's pointing to become the rationale for the ongoing mistreatment of racialized bodies and lack of care for what happens to us when we don't have housing. That's also why you don't see the targeted investments to make sure that when we are thinking about these developments, that we're not just thinking about the home, like the walls and whatever, but the community. It's interesting when in this job, when I've been asked to come to meetings and talk about new developments, what is happening inside that community, whether there's a park or a recreational area or access to a pool or whatever, gets decided and determined as part and parcel of the investment to build that house, because we want to make sure that the folks living in that space feel like they are part of the community. But when it comes to Indigenous folks, when it comes to newcomers, when it comes to Black folks, we don't ask what it is that they need to feel part of that community, and we don't invest in those additional things. The assumption is that having the four walls and the door and a window is sufficient for you, just a step above where you were before, as opposed to allowing us a pathway to actually thrive, because your foundation is your home. And so I think it's really, really important for us to take seriously the need to address those root causes, and then make sure that it's not just collecting data, but that something is incorporated into the requirement for data collection that says, and solve the problem, because we already know what the data is going to say. Right? It keeps coming out all over the place. So I don't think we will be surprised by what we find should this data get collected. And when you disaggregate it, we know what's going to happen. But is there a commitment to actually address the problem? Or is it just a commitment to say, oh, it's enough that we saw the problem?
Right. No, very good points, Laura May and Tennille. Carl or Clarence, anything you'd add to this data question?
Yeah, I sort of jumping off what Laura May said, I think that it is what you do with the data that is really helping us to move forward, because I think, well, we haven't collected data well, but even when we do that, we just kind of point out the fact that we've collected data. So what do you do with that information? How do you implement policies that respond to the inequities that exist? I think that is critical. I think that, you know, we've had discussions with Canada Mortgage and Housing. We've had discussions with Affordable Housing Task Force, and we keep saying that, you know, sort of, because it's down on paper and it's black and white, that's not a plan. That's just kind of a scan. But how do you implement so that we can, in fact, have changes in the community? Because I think, as Tennille says, I mean, there are lots of people who are just a breath away from being homeless. And these are folks who are working, they're caring for their families, and they're just a breath away from being homeless. So we have to think about that. I mean, we have a homeless population, but we have people who are precariously housed and are having challenges sort of going from month to month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important. And Clarence, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. In regards to the data, I'd really like to know how accurate it is. I know that with some of the Indigenous population, they really don't disclose their identity because of stigma and the way they will be treated, or some of the barriers they might face. And yes, precariously housed individuals, yes, homeless, right on the verge. Right on the verge. Things could happen within a blink of an eye, you know, in regards to employment, in regards to an accident, in regards to domestic abuse, in regards to addiction. All of these things are contributing factors that could really skew the numbers on that data.
Mm-hmm. And the pandemic, I would imagine, is exacerbating a number of those issues that you mentioned as well. So
yes.
Carl, could you talk to some of the housing issues that are facing new immigrants to Waterloo Region right now?
Well, I think the pandemic has changed the outlook for everyone. Folks who are new to the community, it's very significant. So, as an example, typically individuals spend 3 weeks in temporary accommodations at Reception House. We have been using hotels as part of the process for the 14 days isolation, and then bringing them to our temporary accommodations, or keeping families in hotels. You know, there are families who are in hotels for 3 months. So instead of 3 weeks, people are staying much longer because we can't find housing for them. If they're a larger family, or if they're a small family, if you are a family of 3, or if you're a family of 7, those are the people that have the biggest challenges, because we can't find places for them. If you have a disability, or someone in your family that has a disability, that's even more challenging for families. So for us, it's taken us a lot longer to find housing for individuals. We've been trying to be creative like everyone else. We've been looking at landlords that we have not dealt with in the past. We're looking at ways in which we can sort of subsidize rents, but that's just a temporary issue, because you can only do that for so long. So if you're looking for a 3-bedroom house and you can spend $3,000 a month, you have no issue. If you're looking for 3-bedroom and you only have $1,700, you are going to have a big challenge. So that is really the affordability, and it's also the crux of the issues as we look to making changes. You're making changes as you're, I think the people always talk about flying the plane and fixing the plane at the same time. We're trying to make changes while we are trying to implement and trying to get people into housing. It's very hard on individuals. And I know that people get frustrated. Those people who are, they come to Canada with a belief that things are going to be so much better, and they've heard a whole lot of what has been said, and then they wonder why it is not so. Why did people lie to me? So we are trying to balance that out in trying to work with people and trying to encourage people to be patient. But I think it's hard when you're new to the community. We're in a pandemic. You don't know anyone, and you're trying to be patient. So it's ongoing, but we keep trying to make small incremental changes. At the same time, we're trying to strategize about how we can have bigger impacts and what can we do as a small organization to change some of what's happening. We've been in discussions with churches about redevelopment of properties. We've been trying to do initiatives that's over and above what our mandate is, so that we can look at how we can make some changes in the community.
Mm-hmm. So some of the solutions you're looking at, as you mentioned, churches, what other solutions are you seeing either locally or in other communities that while they're building the plane while they're flying it? So what are some of those plane building things that are happening?
Well, we're working, we are trying to find, we're working with developing co-ops. We're working with landlords who are open to having discussions as they look at how they're, especially those cases where buildings are being built or renovated. If we can get in on the ground floor, so to speak, we can talk to landlords about possibilities and make them understand the whole issue of affordability. Because we don't want to take away sort of the profit, but we also want to ensure that there has to be a way that new builds has affordable as well as supportive housing in them. We don't want to build just one building where you put all of the same kind of people. I think mixed housing is really the way to go. And how do you convince a landlord that this makes sense for them economically? And that's a big challenge, but that's part of what we've been trying to do.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Tennille, we mentioned, the pandemic is adding an additional layer of disproportionality to racialized minorities trying to access housing. Could you speak to some of the issues that you've been seeing? And solutions, if there are some too.
Carl named a lot of it very well, but now we're truly seeing the impact of being overcrowded or underhoused. So we know that the inability to self-isolate is significant. We're seeing the impact of precarious employment. We know that there are students, youth, members of multi-generational families, that some were able to move out, but loss of employment, they've moved back in. We know that racialized people are working the front lines, that they're at the highest risk. And we know that because of the space that they're in, because they can't social distance, the things that they can't afford, that they must work. Because we've seen a lot of talk about like rent freezes and eviction freezes. These are freezes for not doing things. You still have to pay the rent, they just won't increase it. And they may not evict you right now, but if you're unemployed, it's just a matter of time. So we're seeing that. We're seeing people trying to move out of the space that they're in now. We're realizing that families that were able to split up are now back together because they lost that housing, they lost that additional income. So we also are learning is how many people are living paycheck to paycheck or opportunity to opportunity, because precarious employment often means that you don't have some type of stable job. We know that the recent housing statistics came out, and the average rent for a bachelor unit in this region is $1,200. And if you look at basic livable wage 40 hours a week, gross, you're making just under $2,000. Then you have to pay taxes on that. And then you have all the other expenses that you have to think about. These are things that are impacting people's access to housing, because what's happening in the more private rent market as well is landlords are now being protective. They're watching that income even more because they're seeing the unemployment. They're being impacted by people who can't pay their rent, but they're currently being protected by temporary legislation. So you're facing even more discrimination when you are trying to rent. Whereas before there may have been some consideration, but you're seeing an every man for themselves mentality being picked up. We're also seeing increase in mental health challenges and a need to access mental health support, and realizing that those are not as accessible as we think they are for some of these communities. We're seeing challenges of transportation. So people are looking at housing that is further out, but it's further out from the place that they need to be. They have to consider moving their kids to different schools. These are all things that are happening with access to housing within our communities. And Laura made a very good point, and I'd like to talk about the word affordable, because when we say affordable, affordable by definition is talking about 80% of market rent, and that is not affordable. And we're also not just trying to address housing, we're trying to address communities. So these are the small challenges when we think about it. Housing is so siloed. It's siloed from everything else that we don't realize it. And so this pandemic, the things that are impacting access to housing are not just the buildings, it's everything around it that's failing. And people are spending increased amount on housing, depending on mutual aid in the community, providing grocery cards, prescription cards, to make up for it, to ensure that they can survive and hold on to the minimal, delicate, fragile housing that they do have. So I think we need to tackle affordability, because we're not producing affordable housing. We're producing housing that people who have money think people who aren't making a livable wage should be able to afford, right? That's not affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, Tennille. I was just looking at some rents. You mentioned, 80% of market rent is not affordable. And so part of the issue that we've been learning about is it's not only about developing and building new affordable housing, it's about preserving the 2,000 to 2,500 units a year that we lose in Waterloo region that were deemed at one point to be affordable, perhaps 20 years ago when they were built, and now the owner is able to sell that building. And so I was just prior to this looking at a spreadsheet of rents, and they were $515, $667, $900. That is way less than 80% of market rent. And these buildings are going up for sale, and they're at risk. So I was looking at one bedroom, 2 bedroom, but I wasn't really looking at one bedroom. I was looking at a couple. There's a couple in there. There's people in that bedroom, right? It's not just a one bedroom. There are people in that bedroom. There are people in that 2-bedroom apartment. And all of those people are going to be potentially renovicted, or whatever term you'd use, because the market is hot, and someone will want to purchase this building and potentially not continue to allow people to live there for $550 or $650 a month. So, those are the types of buildings that we really need to be able to maintain and preserve those 50% of market rent that some people really need to be able to survive. So thank you for those comments, Tennille. And Clarence, you're the founder of Crowshield Lodge, which is, quote, a place of safety and unconditional love. And I love that. So I wonder if you could speak to some of the ways that the housing crisis has been exacerbated for the Indigenous community since the pandemic, and what would that be?
Yes, for sure, most definitely. First of all, I'd like to say there's a lot of good stuff going on in our community. There's a lot of good things that are happening. There are some great organizations. If I can share that, I've lived in supportive housing. I have lived in affordable housing. I've worked in supportive housing, and now I'm a housing-based support worker. So I've been doing this work for a little bit. And it's because of this community that I'm able to sit where I am today. You know, I have a sense of belonging, I have a sense of connectedness, and I feel very fortunate to have that. And it would be great if we could make that happen for everybody else that is living in our region that is you know, struggling or facing these issues. Indigenous people are used to circles. They're not used to systems, right? It's the residential school system that got the Indigenous people of today, some of those people, in the predicament that we're in. And it's going to take many generations for us to heal and to work through that from what we are exposed to in those systems. The circles mean equality, right? They mean consensus. They mean that everybody and everything is connected within that circle. And that circle is easy to navigate. With the Indigenous view, land is shared and it's communal. It's not owned. It's actually borrowed to us. It's borrowed to us from the future generations that are in front of us. It's borrowed to us from our children. And we have to work hard to leave something behind for those next generations. So what does that mean now that brings us into today with COVID? There's a total disconnect. And the Indigenous people, along with Black and colored people, are finding it very difficult to navigate it. They're having problems with applications for housing. They're faced with stigma. They're faced with being stereotyped. They're faced with how do they meet a potential landlord and how do they represent well? With all of those things that they're carrying right to begin with. So I would think that we need more racialized support with workers to help these individuals navigate the system, right? When they try to do it on their own, it doesn't work. They need that support. They need someone to walk with them. They need someone to accompany them. The system is a barrier. There's too much red tape. Too much red tape. People get confused. You know, they might have a notion where, you know what, I'm going to do this today. And then somewhere along the way, things start to break down, right? And they don't think that they can do it on their own. Indigenous people shy away from the system, right? And it'll take many generations for us not to walk in the dark, traumatic shadows from the systems. So what are we facing right now during the time of COVID? Well, addiction is on the rise. Domestic violence is on the rise. Mental health is on the rise. Declining health is on the rise. The price of housing is on the rise. Food security is on the rise. And there's not enough space or people to assist everybody that needs this support. Daniil, transportation, yes, that's, you know, people need to get around. And now there's all these stipulations on transportation. So how do we do this? How do we develop something that is affordable, that is attainable, where we can instill community, where we can instill culture, where we can instill connectedness, and where we can instill belonging for the families, for the singles, for the elders, and the youth. That's the question.
Are you going to tell us the answer or just the question? No, we'll get into that. We'll dig into that a little bit more. Thank you for those words, Clarence. I'm just going to, before I turn a question to Laura May, I'm just going to acknowledge a comment that was made by an anonymous attendee that said, our landlord gave us an eviction notice via email and insisted he wanted to sell. He knew that there were 2 immunocompromised people in the family. And when we finally left, he said he had changed his mind about selling and would just go ahead and rent it again. Well, thank you for sharing your experience. And I'm, on that note, want to turn it to Laura May to say, can you speak to some of the ripple effects of not addressing housing issues, and what impact is this having that we may not be aware of, such as what this individual has just shared?
So thank you for that. And for the person that put the comment in, my office hears examples of that quite often, far too often, I would argue. We were hearing examples of that kind of stuff before the pandemic, and now with the pandemic even more, especially as the market is as hot as it is right now. One of the things that's so heartbreaking is that the individuals calling the office think that it's only happening to them. And so I want to emphasize that it's not an individual problem. This is a systems problem that we're talking about. And I don't know how else you deal with a systems problem without systemic solutions, like changes in the system so that different outcomes happen. When I hear Carl talking about the work that they're doing at Reception House, it's commendable. It's also problematic. Like, it shouldn't fall on the shoulders of Reception House and the staff there to address public health needs, mental health needs, education needs, housing needs, all the needs by themselves, and not get funding and support and investment. So on my side, I've been trying to shift some of the ways that we talk about the crisis so that we start to do the right thing, right? It's not a matter of just doing more reports. There have to be solutions, and there have to be targets that we're aiming for, and there has to be checking to see if the things that we've tried to create are actually solving the problems that we know exist, or are there other problems that are now coming as a consequence of that? And then keep doing that work, because we do that for some folks. Like, to be honest, the reason that we have a rental freeze or eviction bans, even temporarily during the pandemic, is because a lot of mainstream, which I mean primarily white, middle-class folks and community, were hurting. They were having experiences that a lot of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people have been having, and nobody cared. And so when that middle began to feel harmed by the pandemic, things shut down. But when years and years and years prior to this, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people were saying, we don't have access to affordable housing, we don't have access to quality healthcare, we don't have access to quality education, nothing stopped. Like, nothing in the system stopped. And so when the pandemic hit, we're already really far behind. And then the system, as it operates, just continued to say that we were the reason that we were far behind. It was our fault that we didn't have access to suitable housing. It was our fault that we didn't have access to enough money to pay the increased rental prices. It was our fault, it was our fault, it was our fault. And so, as my mommy says, I tell you that to tell you this. I think some of the solutions are literally right in front of us. Some of them have to be legislated, because clearly the legislation that exists is not setting us up for success. It's not setting Black folks up for success. It's not setting Indigenous folks up for success. It's not setting newcomers up for success. So some of that has to change. Yesterday, I was actually speaking to a realtor who, I had a number of realtors reach out to me because of how wild the housing market is right now, and for those that are trying to move from the rental units to being a homeowner, right, in the region. Some of it was prompted by that home that sold for the 300K over asking. And this realtor said to me, the Realtors Act, like the act that governs the real estate industry, says that you're not allowed to do the things that are causing these skyrocketing prices and bidding wars. And so where's the teeth behind our legislation to hold folks accountable? Because right now we're all stunned and shocked at the end of reading these articles, but that's just one example. That's happening nonstop because the system is allowing it to keep going. So I do think that there needs to be a holding to account of folks that are allowing these bidding wars to happen. And realtors, who are at the center of seeing how this operates, are the people that can tell us exactly what kind of legislative changes need to happen, as well as tell us when the government isn't making use of the legislative tools that are available to put a stop to it, right? It's the same thing when we think about the affordable housing or the requirements that are happening for new developments. If we actually cared to address the long list of folks waiting for affordable housing, then we would make choices in positions of leadership to ensure that suitable housing is actually made available in the new developments. But it seems to me that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people and newcomers are not centered in the clientele for the new builds that we're talking about. Because when you say something like, we'll have 5 units that are affordable in this big building, and only one of them will be to code for accessibility needs. So one person who has a disability and needs a different type of unit will be able to be housed. How is that addressing the long list? And so it always keeps coming back to me to whether or not we are actually trying and invested in solving a problem. Because if we were trying to solve a problem, then we would be acting in very different ways than we are right now. And we wouldn't be near as shocked about the realities that this pandemic is revealing for so many people. The last thing I would say to that is, as we talk about the pandemic and the urgency to do things now, I always get worried that once we get to the other end of the pandemic, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people will be forgotten again. Right? And so I just want folks that are listening and that are doing the advocacy for affordable housing to keep fighting post-pandemic until there's proof that Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks are housed suitably, that the systems aren't hurting us, that we're prepared should something else happen. Because I think if we don't keep that fight up, all that will happen is we'll find some housing for some folks who happen to be in that middle space, and all the same people that are part of our homeless population that are often precariously housed, not because of them, but because of the system, will be in even more dire straits if they even make it out at the end of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Laura May, for those really important thoughts. And I'm just, we have about 4 minutes left, and we have a few questions I'd like to get to. So I'm going to ask the panel, to whoever wants to answer this question, please jump in quickly when I ask it, and we'll try to get through these. And so, Marjorie says suitability of housing is a big thing. And in her work, she sees families living in homes that are full of mold, no drywall, code violations throughout. And when they ask for help to move to a more suitable house, they're told they have seen worse and that they are considered to be housed, and so they don't have a problem. How do we correct this? Anyone have a thought on that they'd like to jump in? Carl, I see you going.
I think it's sort of back to Laura May's point about legislation, because not only does it have to be stronger, but what's already on the books, you need to hold landlords up to at least what's there now. So the rules that governs all of this stuff, there needs to be tighter, but there are rules that people allow to slide. So the example that was given about being in a living situation with mold, and you know, why would a landlord be allowed to get away with that? I mean, there are rules in the books that says that shouldn't happen. And I think we let them off the hook because, you know, the family says, at least we have a place. You know, they're thinking at least we have a place to live. It's maybe better than what we came from, but we're letting the landlords off the hook.
Right. I don't know that I know how we're gonna do that, but we might ask you for a follow-up on how you think we can stop that from happening and send that out in our follow-up.
Yeah.
We just have time for one more question, and so I'm going to ask this one. What about the role of city or regional government allowing developers off the hook? They get to build an apartment building, but do not allow for any of the units to be available for those of lower income. I certainly see a shift in that changing, but it says it seems that all the municipality cares about is increasing their tax base. And please comment.
I will jump in very quickly, but I'm putting out a disclaimer. I'm already biased, right? So I work on the provincial level, and I'm a big believer that you model leadership and then there's a ripple effect throughout the rest of those systems, because technically all of our elected officials should be working together towards an end to make sure that folks are safe and cared for and surrounded by love, et cetera, right? But if at the top of this, if at the provincial level, for instance, we are providing backroom deals to developers to go and develop on lands that were supposed to be cared for environmental reasons, we're going to go and do those kinds of builds, then that signals to other levels of government that they too can participate in that creative use of space. And so I think that the signaling is hugely important, and that we've got to hold our elected officials accountable to make some of these changes. And some of that means not just to make the plan. I think Carl was saying that, you know, we got these things on paper. It's not just the plan, but how do we know that it's working for the people that we say we want it to be working for? I find that oftentimes when we have these conversations where we're trying to bring together like a big system like housing and something like race and the history of racism on this land, that the racism part is literally the intro. We want to be inclusive, we believe in diversity, we love all the people, but then the plan isn't connected to actually showing me that love. So I think we have to actually start to look at our planning to show that love, to make sure that there are targets and things that we're trying to do. If that means we've got to do some surveying locally to see who is on this affordable housing list, right? We've got a 7-year list. Who's on there? What is it that they need? Like, let's actually engage with folks. Why is it that we've got housing units that aren't being upkept, or that are not, we're not addressing mold, and we're not addressing this, we're not addressing that? Who are in those units? Who are the people that are precariously housed, so that we can make sure that what we create is for them, which goes back to something that I think was the starting point of our conversation today, which is making sure that we're not just having the people in positions of power who aren't the ones who are experiencing precarious housing make decisions about what all the other people who are lower income or racialized, et cetera, need. We need to make sure that infused within the plan is an understanding of who it is that this plan is supposed to be working for, and that we are always checking our work, just like we would with anybody else or in any other group.
Right. We couldn't agree more at the Community Foundation. In fact, we have some really bright students this semester that are doing some work around how can we build inclusivity in developing neighborhoods. So I look forward to their output. I'd also like to mention, just before we close, that Tracy Snook put a great quote from Winston Churchill in there. And I think, Laura May, this was to your point about never let a good crisis go to waste. So, let's not just stop here, but forge forward. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for this insightful conversation. I am honored to be here to learn from you, to listen to you, to your wisdom, as we collectively, our guests today and the Community Foundation, continue to try to work to tackle this issue of affordable housing. And thank you, all of you who have joined us. As mentioned, this is the third conversation in our anti-racism series. We'll be hosting more conversations around anti-racism this year, so please keep an eye out for that information when it becomes available. You may also have seen the information for our next Do More Good Dialogue. It's coming up on Thursday, March 11th at 1 p.m. and will be on the topic of the intersectionality between affordable housing and gender. And you can find more information and register on our website. As mentioned at the start of this webinar, this discussion has been recorded. And we've also captured the questions that were submitted, and I know there were a few that we didn't get to. The recording and answers to those questions and other useful links will be available soon on our website. Before we close, I encourage you to continue to engage in education, in awareness, and most importantly, take action against racism in whatever way you are able. And as Tennille said, it's about action, passion, and fervor to tackling some of the systemic barriers that exist. So thank you again to the panelists and to everyone for attending, and bye for now.